back to Restored Gospel Podcast. We got a special edition today, Stories from Honduras. Brother Shane, if you saw his first video months back where he shared his testimony, shared a little bit about how he had spent time as a young man, as a missionary in Honduras, and has maintained relationship with those folks down there, and recently took a trip and worked at a reunion down there. We're going to share today. I'm excited to hear the story of how the work began in Honduras and some of the testimonies from down there. So I'm just going to turn it over to Shane and we'll get right at it.
How are you doing today, Mike?
Doing good. Get this
Good.
up here right. So you're just actually back, right? Just got back not too long ago.
Yeah, I got back about a week and a half ago. Spent 8 days there and try to go down every year. COVID kind of put a hindrance on that, but over the last, 4 or 5, 6 years, I've gone down yearly. They have a church, they have a reunion down there for the church, and we go down. I go down and share testimony, preach, teach, whatever they want me to do. But the work in Honduras is fascinating, and a lot of people don't really know much about it, how it started. So in the 1950s, I don't have dates in front of me, but I believe it was 1957. There was a doctor named Dr. John Blumenshine. And he was married, had 5 kids, and he was a pediatrician, baby doctor basically. And he had his own clinic in Independence. And a number of people in the Independence area were brought into this world by him. Well, when he was in his late 30s, early 40s, he was diagnosed with cancer, and gave him about 2 years to live. And like so many people that are diagnosed with an illness like that, a terminal illness, a lot of times they just try to make life as simple as you can and pain-free and comfortable, and start to spend those last couple of years with your family and just sort of accepting it. Well, Dr. Blumenshine didn't do that. He wanted to serve the Lord, and he and his wife decided to sell everything they had. They rented out their house, sold the clinic, basically liquidated their lives, bought a Volkswagen Beetle bus, loaded it up with the kids, and headed south into Mexico. They had no idea where they were going. They had no destination in mind, other than that they had some requirements. They wanted to go somewhere where he could do his medical work, someplace that did not have medical access. She was a teacher, and so she wanted to be able to teach. So they wanted to find a place that didn't have schools, and they wanted to find a place that was extremely poor, that just needed help, needed God's love. And so they took this trip into Mexico and kept driving. I've actually made this trip before, and it's a solid 3 days of driving to get from the border of the United States to the southern tip of Mexico. And that's in today's roads. I made that trip in the 90s. So, they didn't have the kind of highways that we have now. So I'm sure it was more than that, but they got all the way through Mexico, still didn't find the ideal spot. They entered into Guatemala, didn't find that spot. It takes about 8 to 10 hours today to drive across Guatemala. Didn't find the place. And of course, they're asking the Lord to show them where he wants them. And, so finally they get into Honduras in about 4 or 5 hours drive today, which I'm sure it was a lot more back then, but they got right back into the middle of Honduras. Honduras is about the size of Tennessee. And they got to the center of Honduras, and they came across this big lake, and it's called Lake Yohoa. And they found the people there to be very humble. There was no schools. There was no medical care. A lot of real simple, easily curable diseases were there that people just didn't know what to do with, and were dying. A lot of children born were born or died at birth. And so if you go if you go back, I think it's back a slide. There's that Beetle bus that they drove, and that house there is the first house that he built. He basically just got materials and they put a place for them to stay. And you can go to the next one. There's the next slide is Dr. Blumenshine in front of that same house. And then go ahead and go to the next one. And so this house here is the first house that they actually lived in. They rented this. It looks like a rundown old barn to us, but this was a house back then. It was, nobody lived in it, and they got it rented out. But the lifestyle there, I mean, there was no electricity, there was no running water. You know, this was about as rural and pioneer as you can get. In fact, they didn't get electricity around the lake until the late 80s, early 90s. I mean, it has always been a very rural area, even to today. But anyway, they they have she wrote a book called Home in Honduras, and it's a good read. I recommend reading it. But she explains a lot of details, all the things they went through, and learning the customs, learning the language, learning how to interact with the local people. But they started just serving. He started giving free medical care. She started teaching classes, inviting the children in the area to come, and she taught, and they taught about the Lord, and as well as reading and writing and all that kind of thing. And anyway, they if you go to the next one, they ended up building this clinic. He took his resources that he had and the locals, and were able to finally buy a piece of land and built this clinic on the land. And it was kind of an L-shaped building, and I believe they lived in part of it, and then they had the clinic in the other part of it. But they even had church reunions there. I mean, the church grew, and there was nothing. There was no church there at all as far as restoration type church. So it really truly was an organic type of situation. But anyway, Dr. Blumenshine ended up, the cancer grew, and he got to the point where he could no longer serve. And, but he told his wife, he told Marion that he didn't want this work to die. And he asked her, he said he would leave it up to her, but he asked her if she would be willing to stay and continue on in this work. I mean, think about how hard that is. A woman with 5 children, small children, in a foreign country with a foreign language and culture, and, just staying there when you could have just come home and been comfortable with your friends and family and, back in the United States. And what a sacrifice that was. She ended up, if you go to the next slide, this is actually his grave. He wanted to be buried in Honduras, and this is where he is today. It's kind of come into some disrepair. This is Brother David Schaff and I went up and looked at it this last trip and took pictures. And actually, we cleared a bunch of brush off of it before we even took this picture. So it has kind of is grown over, and the plaque that's on there is faded and rusted. But anyway, he is still revered among the people there because of what he did and what he started. And it's really amazing because there are still today active members that remember going to the camps, that they had while there, that remembered, that their parents or their grandparents were, either baptized or taught or, came into the gospel through, this man and his wife and the sacrifices that they made. Back in the mid 70s or so, the RLDS finally took it over. The Blumenshines actually wanted the church to help sponsor it, and the church refused. They had no interest in it at the time in the 50s. But by the 70s, it was fully established, and the RLDS came in and took it over. And it's still there today. The COC owns it, the buildings and the land, and it's called La Buena Fe. But we have a number of restoration people that don't affiliate with the COC that are still there today. And so in the late 80s, early 90s, this building you're looking at here is called we called it the Internado. And what it was a man named Bob Bunch went down to Honduras during that time period, and and saw the poverty, and saw so many children running around during school times around, up in the mountains around the lake, and saw all these kids not in school, and started asking questions, and figured out that school is only provided if you can get there. They don't have public busing. So if you're up in the mountains and you live on a, like a coffee farm or something like that, your kids are just going to go uneducated unless you teach them yourself. And so he saw this need, and he purchased this building. It has a little chapel on the edge of it, and then it's got some a big kind of a dormitory inside. And what it was this is actually in the town of Suatepeke. And so kids would come kids would come from the mountains, live here during the school year in this dormitory, and they'd have up to, I don't know, 25 or 30 kids, I think, at times, living here. We had house parents that were local Hondurans that were house parents that would kind of act as guardians while they're living there, and they would attend school in Suatepeke, and it gave them an education all the way up into kind of the high school range, and then they would learn a career. So electrical engineering and all kinds of different careers. And what's amazing is that we have people today, church members, priesthood members today in the Restoration that went through this internado and are productive, 50-year-old, 40-year-old people that have good paying jobs because of this program. And they're active in the church, and it all ties back to what Dr. Blumenshine, the sacrifice that he and his wife made by giving up their comfort here in the U.S. and making that sacrifice before he died. And so I love that story, and it really, to me, that's the gospel.
Didn't you say just recently one of the children of that first group is getting ready to go to a program that your local congregation is able to help out with?
Yeah. So my branch, I told my branch about this young lady. So she is the daughter of a woman who went through this program, and got her full education, and married a man who was also involved in the program. And they live in Suatepeke, and he teaches English at the local school there. And so they're educated, successful people, and but still not rich, obviously. And so our branch decided to help supplement and help her in her schooling. But she's gotten she tested out really high, and in a like an aptitude test, and she is going to like the best university in Honduras. It's in Tegucigalpa, which is the capital, and to be an orthodontist. And you just think about that. I mean, if you can trace it all back to that sacrifice that they made, and here's this young kid who has no connection to it as far as memory wise, but the fruit of that labor can be seen clearly today. And for me, that's really what the gospel is all about, is loving people and making sacrifices for others. And I mean, what a story of compassion and love that the Blumenshines gave to the people of Honduras.
Yeah, it's very touching that he knows he's going to die, and that's his end work was to step out in faith. No idea what was ahead. Just, I want to give what little I have left to the Lord.
Yeah.
Well, I see this slide here, Shane. I want to. So we've been talking about priesthood authority and who has authority to do what, and you had a dream, right? This is a picture from a magazine where you had a dream and saw this situation baptizing here before it happened, correct?
Yeah. I was a young priest, had never heard of or thought of ever doing anything internationally, had never left the country before. One night I had this dream about 3:00 in the morning or so. It was a weird dream because I saw this lake that I had never seen before, with these kind of jaggedy mountains in the background. And I saw myself walk down a hillside into the water, and a young girl with dark skin was in the water. I saw myself, kind of turn around, face a crowd along the shore, raise my hand up and baptize her. And which I was a newly ordained priest, maybe 6 or 8 months, new priest, furthest thing from my mind was leaving the country. I was still, I was in college and I wasn't even thinking about anything like this. But this dream just was so powerful. It woke me up. Like I said, about 3 a.m. I was sweating, and it was just really, really powerful. And I knew it was from the Lord. I could just knew. But it's like, what do I do with this? I don't know anyone in Honduras, or I didn't know it was Honduras. I don't know anyone in this, wherever this place is. And, for all I knew, it was Michigan. I didn't have any idea where this was, although I knew the background was weird, these mountains, well, so roll the clock forward, I don't know, 6 months or so. And I'm at a reunion, and this man is sharing testimonies about this work he's been doing in Honduras. And it was Bob Bunch, the guy that bought that home, that the internado. And he's flipping, people are kind of gathered around. It's like lunch break or whatever. And he's sitting there and he's got this album open and he's flipping pictures. And I walk up and I'm looking at the album, and he flips it open, and there's this picture of this lake, and it's exactly what I saw in my dream. Exactly, and same side of the lake, same mountains, everything. And it was just completely shocking to me. And I'm like, where is this? And he was like, this is Lake Yohoa in Honduras. And, and again, I didn't know what to do with it. Okay. So it's like, okay, this is the place, but how in the world would I ever go there?
Right.
A series of events happened, and it's a long story. I won't go into all the details, but basically a bus was donated to the work there, because getting people to church and to doctor's appointments, things like that, was always tough. So someone donated a bus. It was an old 1969 Chevy. I think it was a Chevy bus. And anyway, they had to get it down there somehow. And so just everything kind of fell in place. And I was at the right spot in my college to sort of take a break. And my local congregation, offered to give me a little bit of help financially to help cover some of my expenses. And now I have a ride to get down there, and so it all just fell into place. And I find myself on this bus traveling through Mexico and Guatemala, heading into a foreign country. I didn't speak a word of Spanish. I'd never even had a Spanish class in school. And so I was like the least likely person that God would choose to go on a foreign mission. I'm a priest. I don't speak Spanish. But the dream was undeniable. It was definitely the Lord, and I had to do it. And so when I got down there, I lived in the internado with the other kids. Most of them were just a couple years younger than me. And so I ended up meeting a neighbor girl. And she had been talking with, had been looking into the church, hadn't fully decided yet. And she and I made a friendship. Her name is Ingris. And we just became good friends. She was about 15. I think I was 19. So she was a little bit younger, but we just hit it off. We're good friends. And anyway, she made the decision she wanted to be baptized. She asked me to baptize her. And we had a baptismal font in Suatepeke, which is the town we lived in, where the internado was. But there was also some people that wanted to get baptized up by the Lake Yohoa. And so, we just figured we just do it all at once in a big service. So we go up there, and it was my turn to go down to the water. And as I'm walking into the water, I looked up at the mountains, and it just like hit me. I am in my dream right now. My dream is happening, and it's like, 6 months or a year before that, I didn't even know where Honduras was. And here I am in this foreign country, performing a baptism. I found out later that lake has crocodile or alligators in it, but I didn't know that at the time. but yeah, so, the Lord just, it was all his work. So whether I was authorized or had the right person lay hands on me or whatever is really irrelevant. The Lord sent me there to do this work, and that's what I did.
That's what I see. I don't know if they could see on their screen. This says 1994. So this picture made it into one of our early church publications called the Restoration Voice, issue number 94. Yeah, the thought that it seems like you use the word authority or just calling, that God called you directly or showed you directly between him and yourself through the gift of dreams, the gifts of the Spirit, dreams, that this would be confirmation to you in a supernatural way, that he had indeed set this up, and it was a divine type of thing, right? So
Yeah.
directly between God and man, and that's how he operates. Well, that's his oh, sorry, I went forward here. I guess we're fast forwarding. So when is this? Is this recent?
So yeah, this is my most recent trip. That girl on my right is Ingris.
Oh, wow, the one in the picture.
Yep, that's her. We've remained friends all this
Okay.
time.
She
Yeah. So yeah, it's and then to the right is Attell and her husband Angel, and they both went through the program through in the
Okay.
internado. And Attell, the lady there, she's the mom of that girl that's going to become an orthodontist.
Okay.
So yeah, so there's a lot of just really good connection to the history of Honduras and Dr. Blumenshine.
Well, so tell me about your recent trip there. How did this reunion go? What were some things that went on?
Yeah, well, it went really well. It's always a beautiful experience. I don't know, I think there's around a dozen branches all around the country. Some people come as far away as a place called Choluteca, which is about 8 hours of driving to the south to come to this reunion. They have it every year. Usually it lasts 3 days. This time it was only 2 days because they kind of rushed it in the planning. But where we are right now is actually that is Dr. Blumenshine's clinic. In this picture here, it's changed over the years. They've added you can see a building above there made out of brick, and they've added onto it, but it's still this is the original building that he built. But anyway, so every year I go down and share testimony, preach, whatever the people. They are completely self sufficient. I mean, as far as they run their own work there. I mean, they have the priesthood and all that. The organization, as far as the organizational aspect of it, they're not like an extension of any church here. They run. They're so totally independent. So I go down as basically a guest minister, and whatever they ask me to do, I do.
I was surprised at the size of this reunion. I was thinking 20, 30 people, but you said how many people were there?
About 150.
Wow.
Yeah, and we've had bigger ones in the past. The church has gone through a lot of the same things that our churches in the United States go through. Had various splits and things. Some of the faction groups have taken a few people away. They had a fairly large split that was really more of an internal thing a couple years ago. So one of the problems with Honduras, one of the things that is kind of things we're struggling with is their knowledge of the Book of Mormon and their understanding of what the Book of Mormon is. So much of their history was centered around the Bible. When you read Dr. Blumenshine or Miriam Blumenshine's, when you read her book, it doesn't mention a lot about the Book of Mormon, and I don't know if they didn't teach it, but it seems like it just wasn't a focus. I know shortly, like in the 70s, I think it was maybe early 80s, they ordained the RLDS ordained a 70 there, who was this really dynamic, well-spoken, energetic guy, local Honduran man, and he really caused the church to grow a lot as far as numbers. He baptized over 1,000 people just by himself. And so he had a really thriving group of people as far as the size, but he did not teach the Book of Mormon. He didn't teach any of the doctrine of the Book of Mormon. It was all centered around the Bible and Christianity. And so a lot of the people, when we showed up in the early 90s and we started sharing testimonies, about the gospel, we started mentioning the Book of Mormon, and they were like, well, Book of Mormon, what? Because the LDS don't have the best reputation there, just because they're, for whatever reason. And so when they found out we were Mormons, a lot of people left. We had people just pull away, and there's a whole congregation in a town called Concepcion that was actually probably the largest congregation that were, not on board with the Book of Mormon, and their pastor, their main leader was definitely against the Book of Mormon. And so about 2 or 3 years ago, there was a split, and basically those that believe the Book of Mormon and the gospel as restored, it stayed within the main body, and those that just kind of wanted a mainstream Christian sort of Pentecostal type church left. And so we've actually dwindled in number, but even then, we still, like I said, we still had about 150 that came. So it's still a thriving group of people, and the Spirit is definitely moving among them.
Well, a couple of things come to mind when you share that about the Book of Mormon. As much as I love the Book of Mormon and it's foundational in my life, teaching me about who God is, His plan for us, it's not the end. It's Jesus at the end, right? And
Right.
It's interesting that, I don't know if it was just the RLDS culture, when the Blumenshines were at that point in the church, that it wasn't a focus, but for whatever reason, they were fulfilling the gospel regardless of promoting the Book of Mormon by serving their fellow man and loving on them, right?
Right.
And so to go down there and convert people to Jesus through your actions, through your love and service, that's the ultimate thing. Whether it almost seems counterproductive to say, but whether the Book of Mormon was involved or not, for them, I mean, the end result is serving your fellow man, loving your fellow man like Jesus, and that's the gospel of Jesus. So it's the Book of Mormon has its place, but the ultimate result is, does it change? Has the gospel changed you on the inside where you want to serve your fellow man?
Right.
So I asked you, I think, Shane, in a culture like this, what does the Book of Mormon, add? Like I would think that it would strengthen your relationship with your Heavenly Father, but maybe that's from my Gentile, affluent type of lifestyle here in the United States, in a different culture where there's humility and poorness. We'll see some of that in some of the people you introduce us to. I don't know. It's like, it seems like a different, maybe there's less to come out of. Maybe it's an easier, there's less barriers between them and knowing God, I guess.
Yeah. So life there is simpler.
Mm.
The mindset is simpler. It's not so much about your great learning or your impeccable wisdom and logic. It's really more about it's more about relationships. They're very family oriented. Whenever I go down, I mean, okay, well, here's an example. So I go down to this family, and they automatically, they say, you're staying with us. They give up their bed. They sleep in an uncomfortable bed. They treat me like a king, and it's like, and that's just what they do for each other too. I mean, their habits, the custom is, when you walk into someone's house, you get fed. I remember when I lived in Honduras before, I would go out to some of these villages. I had people give me chickens and roosters, and I even had a family give me a pig, a small pig, and I didn't want to reject it because they were making a sacrifice, but I had to bring this pig back to Suatepeke, which is a town, and I didn't grow up on a farm, so I had no idea what to do.
A collar
Yeah,
leash.
yeah. I put it in the bed of my truck, and I had a pickup truck, and I tied it. It had a leash on it, and I tied it to the spare tire to keep it from jumping out or falling out. And so I'm driving back.
And this pig.
So I'm driving back into Suatepeke, and this pig squealing in the back, and I have no idea what to do with it.
You don't even know how to take care of it, probably.
Right. So, I mean, luckily I had local people in Suatepeke that could help me, and I actually kept it for a while. We raised it up and made it kind of big and fat, and then gave it away to someone else that needed it.
A mental picture of you laying down on your cot at night, just staring at this pig sitting by your bed, staring at you in your face, both of you just going,
Right.
You have a beautiful relationship.
Right. But yeah, I had chickens, and I mean, this is a whole new experience for me being a young man. But yeah, well, the people are just so generous, and it's not about pecking order, flashiness, or titles, and you just don't get that as much in this environment, and it makes it so much easier to just sort of let your hair down and just love people.
Right.
You're not trying to impress anybody. You're not showing off your car or anything like that. You're just loving,
You mentioned having I thought this was kind of neat. Maybe you'll get you were having a breakfast one day, and of course in their culture, coffee is a big a source of money. And you brought me some green coffee beans from Honduras. I can't wait to roast them. But you said you were having breakfast there and enjoying their fresh coffee, right from the and how your mindset kind of changed a little bit, but the fellowship that you had. Speak to that a little bit.
Yeah, well, there was a time in my life, when the word of wisdom and all that, I was so adamant about all of it. I treated it as the law, and I hear stories about people getting excommunicated because they drank coffee and things like that. And so, I mean, coffee was, to me, you might as well be taking cocaine, I mean, I just saw it as this horrible thing. And well, time's gone by, and I've viewed things differently. And as I've studied church history and all that, I just, my mind has shifted, and I realize it's more about loving people. And so because of their culture, they do very much enjoy coffee. It's part of their daily routine, and it's all homemade, and it's not chemicals or anything. I mean, they grow it organically right there in in the hills right by their houses, and process it all right there, and roast it and everything, and then grind it and filter it. And there it is, And so it's really very, very pure and clean. And so, one of the things they do is they have kind of these dry breads that they make, which standing alone, they're not great in my mind, because I'm used to sweet American food, But they dip it in this coffee, and it smells really good, and it's got a really good flavor. And so this trip, I just decided, I'm not really a coffee drinker. I never really have been, because of my family and convictions, and I thought, I'm just going to sit here with them. I'm going to have this little, 1 inch, it's a tiny little cup they use. And I'm going to have this little tiny little sip of this coffee, and dip the bread, and just fellowship. And so we sat around their kitchen table, and, there's 4 or 5 of us sitting there just fellowshipping, talking, sharing stories, sharing experiences, just loving each other. And, and it wasn't about the coffee. It was about the connection. And, I thought, and as I'm sitting there doing this, I thought, I could have been in my hard, rigid view of what the gospel is. And I could have been over by myself, or in my bedroom, while they sit there and sin around the table, and I would have missed this opportunity for this interaction with them, and to love them. And I'm not saying that you do that with everything. Obviously there's lines that have to be drawn, but I think some of the lines that we draw for ourselves are more cultural and
Right.
traditional than they are spiritual.
Well, that was neat. That's so what is this reunion? Is this the one you were just at, right? What's this what is this building here?
So we rent out a campground. Donations come from the restoration branches in the U.S., and it pays for the camp. The local people just don't have enough to do this, but we rent a campground. This is like the main meeting hall where they meet. And of course, there's no air conditioning or anything like that, and people, you sitting in there and you sweat and everything else. But it does have electricity, and so we're able to use a microphone, and so everybody can hear. And this is just one of the, I think it's one of the classes that they did. But the environment is just, it's a real nice little campground. I always take down donations. People sometimes give me money directly to buy things for them. When I find someone in need, I'll help them. We took down a bunch of clothes, so these little girls are trying on these donated clothes that for them. So yeah, that's what we're doing there. And this shot here, this is the kitchen that was used to feed the 150 people.
Wow.
I mean, you can see the wood-fired stove over there with the pot on it. Now there was a gas stove, like a propane gas stove in there as well that they were using, but still very crude environment. The water is not water that you can drink, so you can use it to wash things, but you can't eat afterwards. You have to use a hand sanitizer or bottled water to make anything safe to eat and drink. And so, I mean, just look at this environment of how they're having to prepare this food. It's just amazing, feeding 150 people in that situation.
Wow.
Yeah. This is a shot of a bus so they rented a small bus. The church in Tolateca, which is like 8 hours away. The people there are very, very poor, and so they rented a bus to help bring them from there up to the reunion. That lady in the middle there is Sarah Schaff. She's from up here. She's a Honduran, but she grew up in the United States.
Gotcha. Okay.
So, yeah. This picture is Brother Noel. Noel is he went through the program. He was just one of the poor mountain kids, and from around the lake area in a little village called Horconcitos. He ended up going through the program in the internado, and then the donations from the United States helped pay for him to get further education. And he's actually an electrical engineer, and he works at the power plant. It's a hydroelectric power plant. Makes a decent wage, supports his family, and he's the kind of the pastor of this branch. This is the little church behind us. There is a Restoration Church in Horconcitos.
Gotcha.
And then this is just kind of a little side note that I think is interesting. A lot of people don't know this, but this church is a Catholic church, and it's in a town called Comayagua, which is where you fly into, and it was built in 1634.
Wow.
And what's really crazy is the clock. If you look at that tower, the clock that's about halfway down, that clock was made in around the year 1100. It's actually the oldest functioning clock in the world. And
wow.
It was built in Spain by the Muslims. When the Muslims were in charge of Spain, they built it. And it got used in, I don't know, some cathedral there. And then it ended up getting sent to Honduras by King Philip III of Spain in 1715. And it's been in that building ever since and still functioning, keeping time. They have a guy that is assigned to it to keep it oiled, and he gives tours of it and stuff. But
wow.
You would never think, you're in this really super poor little country in the middle of nowhere, and there's this amazing piece of old architecture
in the world.
Yeah.
You're a lot taller, I see, than the people down here.
A little bit. Yeah. Just a little bit. Yeah. This is when I went to Lilliput. No, but so this is a really wonderful couple. They his name's Gerardo, and his wife is Marta, and they're just really humble. They're kind of like sort of the grandparents of many of these villages. She's known for her cooking. She bakes these really good breads, and she does it on a wood-fired open like oven, like an old Adobe oven. It's not like a regular, electric stove, and just kind of really old school, really humble. We showed up there unexpectedly, unannounced, and she made a full meal for us. We weren't even, and we had plans to eat somewhere else, but it's just a custom. They're just so giving, This is there's that man to the right that has the machete in his hand is one of our priesthood members, and he's just a really, really humble, very, very poor man. Loves to tell testimonies. You notice that he's not wearing any shoes.
I see that.
Yeah. We've tried to give him shoes over the years, and he refuses them. He just doesn't like them. He grew up without them, and he's just used to not having them. But he's in his 90s.
Oh my goodness.
He's just really, really, really humble. Still, you can see he's carrying the machete. I think he was going, and I don't know what he was doing. I think he was doing some work in the field. When we ran into him while we were in this little village. It's the village of Magote is the name. But yeah, and if you go back to him real quick, so we went up to him and said hello and all that, and he just immediately started sharing testimony, like one right after another. And and he only has one tooth, and so he's hard for me to understand. My Spanish is not good enough to really catch everything, but I did catch one of the testimonies. He was talking about a man that he had visited in another village that was rich. And the man was asking him about the story of the rich man. What does it mean? And explain it to him. So he was explaining it to him. And he said that another minister, like a Protestant minister, showed up and said, and he asked the Protestant man the same story, same question. Tell me about this, the parable of the rich man. And the man started sharing it. And the rich man, this rich man that lived in this village, was like, no, this is the truth. The other brother taught me the truth. And so when another person came later to try to, convince him to go to their church or whatever, he said, no, I already have a minister, and his minister is this guy with, this dirty man with no shoes and carrying a machete. That's the minister that he knew carried the Spirit of God. And anyway, that man ended up dying like a week later.
Oh my.
Yeah. So anyway, he was just popping these testimonies out one right after another while we were there, and just really, really humble. It just makes you look at your life and say, man, these first world problems that I deal with are just so insignificant compared to, the way he has to live and the poverty that he's in, and how much the love he bears of Christ. You can just see it in his face.
That's living the gospel every day, something. Just during the reunion here.
Yeah, this during the reunion, they put the priesthood members at a table and fed us. This was kind of go ahead. Did you have something?
Was this about what you preached on, and then the other guy?
Yeah.
Oh yeah. This is a good story.
Yeah. So this was kind of for me, it was sort of a highlight. So, we've been talking about temples, and I've done some temple stuff on my Restoration Believer channel. And so it's been kind of a topic in my mind a lot, understanding that we are the temple of the Holy Spirit. And so, I thought, this would be a good, I felt that, I'm not going to say it was God speaking to me, but I felt this prompting to share the same message to the people there when I had the opportunity to preach. And so I preached on the first day and preached on temples. And unfortunately, the man that's at that podium there, he was not there the day that I preached this. His name's now Dean, and he's one of the respected priesthood men that's there. He's an elder, and he was not able to make it on the day that I preached. So I preached the sermon, talked about the tabernacle of Moses, the temple of Solomon, and then the day of Pentecost and all that stuff. Everything we've talked about on the podcast, I talked about on the sermon. And basically just highlighting that how special they all are, that each one of the people there, you're not just an audience sitting in a theater, you are a temple, and you have to, protect that temple and preserve that temple and keep it pure and sanctified, much like the priest was, had to keep the temple holy. And so sharing that message, it created a lot of good conversation and good response. And so the next day, which was there's only a 2-day reunion. So the next day, he did the final sermon. I did the first one. He did the last one. And so about 5 minutes before the sermon, I went up to him and, we talked for a minute, and I said, I'll be praying for you, and I forget how it came up, but the topic of the sermon came up, and he said something about temples. And I said, are you preaching about temples? And he said, yes. And I said, that's what my sermon was on. And he was like, really? And I mean, we hadn't, we were comparing notes, and it was like, we had like the same sermon. And so, he said, well, I hate to repeat what's already been done. I said, well, the Lord obviously is for a reason. I said, you preach whatever you're led to preach, and we'll let God take the message from there. And so he did. He preached, and it was like identical, same topic, same same conclusions, that about each of us being at the temple and everything. And it was just, for me, I was just sitting there in awe, just thinking, wow. I mean, here we are. I'm in a foreign country. I'm with a man who doesn't speak a word of English, Now Dean doesn't speak any English. He didn't know I had a podcast. He didn't know that, that we had talked about on our podcast. I mean, he didn't know anything about what I had done or where I was coming from. And yet here we are preaching the same exact sermon, in a foreign language, in a foreign country. And it just shows you how God, the geography doesn't matter. The language barriers don't matter. Cultural stuff doesn't matter. God is the same God of every single one of us, and it's his work. And we're just players in it. And we just have to be willing to respond to him and do what he bids us to do. And we don't have to understand it. We don't have to question it or wonder why. We just obey and just keep ourselves in check and carry the light of the gospel in our hearts and keep our hearts soft so he can use us.
That was a really, really neat testimony. Well, that's there was did you have a video of, or was that the man that the 90-year-old, was that the same guy that you had a video of that was talking?
Yeah, I have a couple different videos. I don't have them queued up right now, but
Gotcha. Okay.
yeah, there's a few videos. One I videotaped this sermon, and then also I did Trino is the guy with no shoes. And
Okay.
I videoed him a little bit too. I was gonna I videotaped him thinking I would try to figure out what he was saying because I didn't catch everything just because of him not having any teeth. But I may do that later. I may have one of my Honduran friends actually figure out what he was saying and put a script out on it or something, because I want to hear his testimonies.
How do you keep up your language skills, like living in Fort Worth, Texas, and not being down there all the time?
Well, you have to go to a lot of Mexican restaurants.
Right.
Now, it's I was there. I lived in Honduras for 3 years, just short of 3 years. And I think when you've been in someplace long enough that you actually start thinking in the language, and dreaming, and I had dreams in the language, I think it sort of like locks itself in. And so, because it was weird. I went probably more than a decade without saying a single word of Spanish. But then when I was faced with having to speak it again, it came back, because through my period where we went through my divorce and all that, I kind of lost touch with some of the people in Honduras, and then reconnected, years later. And it was like we never missed a day. It was like we just picked right back up where we had been, and and it just became amazing. But yeah, the language just, I don't know, it didn't really go. It didn't leave. So.
Well, that's quite I'm glad we were able to get out the Blumenshine story and Bob Bunch, and just to see the fruits today from that guy just taking off in his Volkswagen bus, right? Lord,
Yeah.
Take us where you want to work, and we're available to help. Amazing.
Yeah.
Well, do you so any plans to go back down there in the future? Or you said from time to time some of the people come up here, and because where you're at in Fort Worth, you're able to run across them. Is that right?
Yeah, sometimes some of the people that are a little bit better off, they're able to come up to the United States. Like my friend Ingress, the one that I baptized there at the beginning, she comes up. She's got a business where she sells paint, paint store. So she'll come up to the United States and has paint, like has paint connections here that she buys paint from. And then she has a few family here as well. So she's actually come to our house here in Fort Worth twice. But then there's a few others that travel once in a while, and we're able to see them. We brought up Etel and Angel and their whole family a few years ago. They came up for one of our restoration reunions. We're there for the week. So there's some connection, but the main barrier is that just no one speaks any English, and very few of us speak Spanish. So
right.
That's the biggest challenge. But.
Well, anything else to share about your recent trip?
Well, yeah, I did have one interesting thing happen. So I was sitting at that table. If you want to put that picture back up, where I was sitting with those men around the table at the reunion. I was sitting there, and if you look at, so Sarah is the lady there, and to her right is a man. You see that man right there. he came up to me.
Oh yeah.
He came up to me like in private and said, "Hey, brother Shane, I need to ask you something." And I was like, "Okay." And so we went off and had this talk, and he asked me. He said, "I've had something that it's been weighing on me for a while now, and I'm as I study the Book of Mormon, I'm trying to understand it, but I just can't get it straight in my mind." And he said, "So in the past, I've asked the same question to several other brethren that have come to Honduras, and he said, and I've been given an answer, but I can't sort it out in my mind. And the question is if they are of the tribe of Manasseh, then what are white people? What tribe are white people from, or like the Americans from?"
Mm-hmm.
And the answer he was always given was Ephraim. And he just couldn't sort it out. He reads the Book of Mormon. He reads the stories. He reads the prophecies of the last days, and he just couldn't figure out how we could be from Ephraim. And so I told him, I said, well, there are individuals that have been told in their patriarchal blessings that they're from Ephraim. However, the white people as a whole are Gentiles. And it was like a load was lifted off his shoulders. He was like, that's what I've been trying to figure out, and said, yeah, we're Gentiles, because it clearly says in the Book of Mormon that the record of people of Lehi, the record would come to the Gentiles. And so Joseph Smith had to be a Gentile. Now, whether or not it was blood, descendants or whatever, just a spiritual lineage, that we're Gentiles, and so, and the Gentiles' job, according to the Book of Mormon, is to take the gospel to the house of Israel, and in many ways we built a Gentile church instead of doing what we were told to do. And so, but revealing that to him, I mean, it's just a little tiny little nugget, but for him that was just such a big deal, because he just couldn't straighten that out in his mind. And I think going forward now, as he reads it, and he reads about Gentiles, and he reads about House of Israel and all that, he can kind of visualize who God's talking about and what the prophecies of the last days are referring to. And it just kind of made it all, it was like the final piece of the puzzle that made it all make sense.
Right. Yeah. My friend Corey Stark taught a class yesterday morning, on the Book of Mormon, and started off with the Gentiles and who they are and the prophecies. It's also interesting if you think about God trusting a group of people to bring the story of the Book of Mormon, the covenants, God's dealings with Lehi and his family, to entrust a group of people to bring that story. But what happens when that group of people mess up the story and the focus of the story? Are they going to be trusted? So you see how this one man, just from what he's been taught by the ministry that comes down from, the United States, the white people he has contact with, how you said that was causing him to doubt the Book of Mormon. Like, this isn't make sense. This can't be real. But when you tell it correctly, how that opens up for him. And, is there a need for us to, we need to get things straight in our minds if we're going to help other people, and share the story correctly.
Yeah. I mean, it became a stumbling block for him,
Right.
and I'm sure the ministers he talked to had good intents,
Right.
they're just passing on what they understood, but I think that's why it's so important that we read the Book of Mormon and we just go by what it says. When you start adding in all these other things that have been added over time, it does become confusion and stumbling blocks and complicated, and it's really simple,
Right. And the prophecies are amazing in that book, and we're living in the fulfillment of those prophecies. So to understand them correctly, helps figure out where God's at, where we're at, what's going on with the work. And we have to be sure that we take the truth and not our own history or understanding. It's very
Right.
true. I'm glad you shared that. I wanted to make sure we got that on here today. So thanks. That was
Yeah.
good.
Yeah.
Really neat. Well, brother, thanks for your service to those people down there and being willing to go down there and travel. And it looks like those chairs there, I don't know if if I'd be sitting on the floor, or I don't know if those would even support me.
Yeah, they they did something that was funny. You know, in Honduras, they're not nearly as worried about whether you're fat or skinny or whatever, you know, and so people don't get offended if someone says, "Oh, wow, you know, so and so is so fat." You know, it's not offensive. They're just like, "Yeah, I am," you know, and well, so I'm in the middle. I go in, I sit down in the middle, like the church is full of people. You know, there's over 100 people in this church, and I'm sitting about halfway up, and I plunk down in one of the chairs, and this man walks up behind me and taps me on the shoulder, and he's like, "Brother Shane, I think you better use two." and, and he brought another chair with him, and he stacked it on the other one so that I had to sit on a stack of two chairs. And you know, and I was just thinking, man, if you did that in the United States, can you imagine how offended people might be?
Oh my gosh. You're testing the limits of our plastic, brother.
Right, exactly. You know, and of course now I'm on a diet, and
well,
but
just the size is a lot. Americans are a lot larger.
Yeah. Let me share one of the quick kind of aha moment I had while there. And you know, we've been talking so much here lately on the doctrine, you know, and church history and all the minutia of the organization. And Honduras was a really good opportunity for me to sort of get reset, because they as far as scripture wise, I mean, they have the Book of Mormon in Spanish, but there's not, the inspired version is not there in Spanish. The Doctrine and Covenants is in Spanish, but there really isn't anything else. There's really very little tracts or, you know, autobiographies or, you know, any kind of historical type documents are not in Spanish. And so the people's understanding of the gospel is much simpler. You know, it's just, and their culture is much simpler. And so I found myself not feeling a need to go into breaking down details of little things and explaining this and that and House of Israel and blah, blah, blah. And, you know, just all the details and all the working parts of our understanding of what the gospel is and what the church is and the priesthood and all the functions and the keys and all the things that we've sort of piled on over the years in the Gentile church. You know, just going there and just loving people, you know, just listening to their stories, telling them how much God loves them, that they're a temple of the Holy Spirit and he wants to live in them. That all we have to do is repent, soften our hearts, you know, and just getting back to that kind of that simple, pure message of love, you know, and I was given some money by some of the people here. My local congregation gave me some, and then we took some, and so I kind of had this money, and I was like looking for opportunity to take care of people, to love people. You know, I don't just go handing it out. I don't think that's the way to do it. But like we bought a cane for a guy who needed one, who was carrying an old kind of stick. He carried a stick around with him, so we bought him a proper cane. Paid for a few things, few procedural things, health wise, and I mean just little things here and there that gave us the opportunity just to love and just do it out of love, you know. And when as I went about all the different villages and seeing old friends, meeting new people, sharing testimony, it just really became clear to me that the gospel is about love. And that sounds cliche and it sounds, you know, canned, because I think we always do look for something more complicated, you know, and we try to pile on a big organizational chart, you know, to explain life after death and all these things. And the thing is that Christ was so simple. If you read the Sermon on the Mount, it was really simple. Love your neighbor as yourself. Do good to those that despitefully use you. You know, love your enemy, and, you know, take care of the least of these, your brethren. You know, and that is the gospel. That's pure religion. You know, and we do it not because we're trying to get pats on the back or trying to, you know, earn something. We just do it because God loves us, and we want to show that same love back to him. You know, loving the least of these as brethren, kind of thing. And
go ahead.
Yeah, it was just such an eye opener for me, and I'm probably doing a terrible job explaining it, but
No, it's the simpleness is the beauty in the story, and it's always the simpleness that gets buried among other things. But it is the cliche simple thing that needs to be, you know, things get buried because they're so obvious. It gets buried by everything else. I was so touched this year by the Chosen season 3. My wife and I spent a couple hours yesterday watching the last couple of episodes, and man, I just got to think those people are so inspired and directed by the Holy Spirit that are producing that, because the content is phenomenal. The way they brought out Jesus just loving on people and how he's helping them see through their arguments and their petty arguments in this world, to see past that and to see his simple message of loving one another. And when he preached to the congregation with the loaves and fishes, and that miracle took place, and people are leaving there, Greeks and Jews, Gentiles, saying, we've treated each other bad. It's all about treating one another good. And how the spiritual authority wanted to focus on the law, and like, what? You ate with Gentiles? That's blasphemy. That's you went against our law. And they're like, no, our laws are wrong. We're treating each other poorly. To watch Jesus love on people, and then to watch the church ministers or priesthood be angry at him because they missed the simple message and they wanted to focus on the law. And it was very touching to me, and reminds me a lot of the predicament we're in today, where we miss that simple message of loving one another.
yeah. Yeah, the thing about it is that I think growing up, anytime anyone said anything about like love your neighbors, or
Yeah.
things like I don't know. I'm trying to think of like situations like I've heard as growing up, like if someone said we just need to have a personal relationship with Jesus, things like that. In our culture, in the church, we would say, "Oh, that's being Protestant."
Right.
Stop. That's what that sounds like. That sounds Protestant. But the thing about it is that there's nothing more Protestant than the Book of Mormon.
Hmm.
I mean, in terms of the way we label it, Protestant. The love of Jesus, the simplicity of the gospel, the personal relationship, all of that is found in the Book of Mormon like nowhere else. And so rather than resisting that need to have a relationship with God because we label it as a Protestant notion, we need to be embracing it even more than the Protestants, because that's what God wants. And the Book of Mormon reveals a deeper level of that relationship. And so we're able, if we will adopt the Book of Mormon, if we will adopt the doctrine found in the Book of Mormon, we will love better than anyone else. We will be kind and patient and generous and give grace to others like nobody else. And I think that's really kind of been the realization for me in the last few months, is just as I read the Book of Mormon, as I'm putting it online, I just see how simple and beautiful it is. And we have to come to the point where we embrace that and not resist those ideas and say, oh, those are Protestant notions. We need to get rid of the complexity and just get back to knowing our Savior.
I'm curious, Shane, as you're putting up your videos, when you read the Book of Mormon out loud, I mean, I picture you sitting at your desk in front of a microphone reading it out loud. Do you find that does that do something different to you? Do you feel like that goes into your brain in a different way other than sitting there reading it silently, or do you feel like it lasts longer in your memory, or any changes, or just kind of the same thing?
Well, this sounds crazy, but I don't get a lot out of it when I'm just reading, because I'm focusing so much on not messing up, and I'm make
Right.
sure I read
Okay.
every word correctly and all that. I'm more focused on the mechanics of it.
Right.
But where I do get fed is when I put the pictures in, because I'm going through word by line by line, phrase by
Mhm.
phrase, trying to put pictures in and videos that match up to what it's talking about,
Gotcha.
and then also listening to it later, which sounds crazy to listen to my own voice, but hearing it read out loud, it does bring your mind is able just to think, rather than think about it, rather than reading it rather than putting brain power towards reading it. Your mind is relaxed in terms of reading, and you can just hear it. And so I often listen to listen to myself, which sounds narcissistic, but it like I'll listen to it in the car or listen to it at work, and just hearing the word has helped tremendously too.
Yeah, that's interesting thought, the visual aspect of it. I guess most of the time I'm in my car when I'm listening, so it's hard for me to maintain thought process when I listen to things while I'm driving sometimes. But that's interesting. Well, we'll put a link below so people can enjoy if they want to listen or watch and listen or any of that. We'll have a link to those videos. That's a good work, man. Interesting stuff. All right. Well, thanks for sharing today. Appreciate it. We'll
all right,
get together here in a little bit for our next one.
All right. Thanks, Mike.
Yep. Take care.
All right. You too.